Today, we're digging into a critical new playbook for leaders trying to make sense of an increasingly chaotic world. And let's be clear, this isn't just some theoretical exercise. It's a strategic framework for a reality that could be here a lot sooner than we think. So, I want you to picture this. The date is March 2026. A single event sets off a chain reaction, and suddenly, all the strategic assumptions your company was built on, they're just gone, overnight. This is the scenario we really need to get our heads around. Let's just walk through how fast this all goes down. It starts with a military strike, Operation Midnight Hammer. The very next day, the response comes. The Strait of Hormuz, a vital artery for global energy, is mined. And the numbers here are just staggering. We're talking 21 million barrels of oil per day. Stopped. Just like that. Within a few days, crude oil prices shoot past $100 a barrel. The speed is just dizzying and the impact is immediate. And this, really, is the gut check moment for every leader. It forces you to ask two core questions. First, is your operational strategy actually built for this kind of shock? And maybe even more important, does your board have the framework to even understand, let alone govern, this level of complexity? So, how do you even begin to answer those questions? Well, for starters, you can throw out the old playbook. It's obsolete. Instead, this analysis gives us 5 distinct lenses, 5 different ways of seeing the world, drawn from 5 key thinkers that can help us navigate this new reality with a lot more clarity. All right, our first lens comes from the work of John Mearsheimer, who's a huge name in structural realism. His big idea is that competition between great powers isn't really about ideologies or personalities. It's just baked into the system. At the end of the day, it's all about power. In this slide right here, it perfectly captures Mearsheimer's concept of bounded orders. See, that old idea of a single globalized world order, it's gone. He argues it's been replaced by 3 distinct spheres: a Western order led by the US, an Eastern order led by China, and a much more transactional global South. Now, each of these operates with its own rules, its own currencies, its own goals. The key takeaway for any global company: you're not playing on one chessboard anymore. You're playing on 3, all at the same time, and they each have different rules. Okay, so we've got the big geopolitical structure. Now let's zoom in on the economic battleground with our second thinker, Dr. Jonathan Ward. His work is laser-focused on the US-China rivalry, and he's really pushing C-suites to see it not as some distant political problem, but as a core business reality you have to deal with now. And this leads to Ward's big idea, what he calls corporate triage. He says we're in a decisive decade where companies have to make some really tough, probably irreversible choices. Are your supply chains aligned with the West or the East? Is your tech stack dependent on one side? And the big one, are you a global company that happens to sell in China? Or are you a Chinese market company with a global footprint? According to Ward, the time for trying to hedge and play both sides, well, that window is closing fast. But, it's not all about the US and China. And that's where our third thinker, Dr. Parag Khanna, comes in with a really important correction. He argues that while the West is obsessed with this great power competition, Asia is quietly busy building its own deeply interconnected economic system. I mean, just look at this number. Let it sink in for a second. $3.2 trillion. In 2025, that's what the trade within the ASEAN bloc of Southeast Asian nations became worth. For the first time ever, it surpassed their trade with the US and the EU combined. This isn't just some forecast, it's a massive structural shift that's already happened. Khanna's point is that a whole new economic center of gravity is forming, and it's being driven by Asian connectivity. Next up, we have Afshin Molavi, who forces us to look beyond the G7 and really see the rise of what he calls the 85% world. The huge majority of the global population that is busy building its own parallel systems and networks. And this quote right here, it just cuts right to the heart of it. The big shift to South-South trade and supply chains, it's not being driven by some anti-West ideology. It's pure pragmatism. It's just good business. Countries in the global South are finding new partners who deliver on cost, reliability, and resilience, and they're building their own infrastructure to support it all, from new arbitration courts in Dubai to massive trade hubs in Singapore. And that brings us to our final lens. And honestly, this might be the toughest one for Western executives to really get their heads around. Professor Keyu Jin argues that we have to hold 2 seemingly opposite ideas in our heads at the same time. China is absolutely a systemic rival. But it's also an indispensable anchor of the global economy that, as she puts it, is not really possible to just stop or decouple from. And if you want to see what she means in practice, just look at this. The sheer scale of capital that China is putting to work in its 15th five-year plan, it's just mind-boggling. These aren't just abstract numbers. They represent trillions of dollars in state-directed investment aimed squarely at dominating the industries of the future, like clean energy and AI. This is exactly why Jin argues that a simple decoupling strategy is just not going to work. You need a much more sophisticated, new China playbook. Okay, so we've got these 5 different ways of looking at the world. What happens when we put them all together? Let's see how they help us understand 2 critical flashpoints from that March 2026 scenario we talked about. So remember that crisis in the Strait of Hormuz? Well, it's not just an oil story, not even close. It's a massive shock to the global fertilizer market. As you can see here, a huge percentage of key products like urea and sulfur flows right through that one choke point. The price spikes create an immediate food security crisis, and it hits markets in the global south, like India and Brazil, especially hard. This is where Mearsheimer's hard-nosed geopolitics crashes head-on into Molavi's 85% world reality, forcing a country like India to completely remap its agricultural supply chain in real time. Now let's look at the tech side of this. There's a fascinating paradox playing out. The West is totally focused on winning the race for the most powerful cutting-edge AI chips. Let's call it the tiger chip approach. But China's playing a totally different game. It's using slightly older, more mature chips and innovating at the architectural level, combining them into something we can call a Sherman swarm. And this approach is aimed squarely at dominating the huge middle market for things like industrial and automotive AI, a market the West is in real danger of just ceding. So, after all that analysis, we get to the most important part. What do you actually do about all this? When you synthesize all these frameworks, you get a really clear, actionable playbook for any leadership team that's serious about navigating this new world. Okay, here it is. 6 critical imperatives. 1. Geopolitical intelligence can't be an afterthought anymore. It has to be institutionalized in the C-suite. 2. It's time to execute that tough but necessary corporate triage on the China-US axis. 3. Secure your silicon supply chain and diversify your AI infrastructure. 4. Actively map and navigate the fertilizer food nexus. 5. You need a strategic anchor in the 85% world, a hub in a city like Dubai, Singapore, or Mumbai. And finally, number 6, build a treasury function that's truly resilient and can operate in a multi-currency world. And it all comes down to this single idea, the ability to synthesize these different lenses. Realism, geo-economics, connectivity, multiplicity. It's no longer a nice-to-have or a luxury. In the decade to come, it is the primary source of durable competitive advantage. In other words, understanding this stuff is how you win. Which brings us full circle, right back to where we started. This isn't just about corporate strategy, it's about governance. As you look at this new, complex reality, the most important question to take back to your organization, to your board, is this one. Are we truly equipped to lead in this new world?